You remember when your phone had a 4-digit passcode and then somewhere along the line they changed it to 6 digits? Well, those 2 extra digits apparently are responsible from taking it to about 10,000 possible combinations to about a million possible combinations. I look at content creation in 2024 and beyond the same way. Whether you're working on a new podcast, YouTube channel, or Instagram account, you're probably wondering the same couple questions that we all are, right? Which is, how will I be different? What will I talk about, and who will I talk to? The passcode theory not only solves all of this, but it makes it more fun and sustainable to keep creating for a long period of time, which we know no matter what platform you choose, that's going to be required to ensure the level of success you likely want. So let's start by talking about saturated markets. I think there's some truth to there being so many podcasts and so many YouTube channels, so many TikToks. But I think part of the saturation problem comes from everyone trying to be known for one thing. It's not always natural and human to be like, this is all I think about and this is all I am. And so it makes the content that you're making seem a little bit more disingenuous, because it's sort of like when you go to make a new email or an Instagram account and you see that your name is taken, right? You don't just go, oh, well, I'm not going to make an email, or I'm not going to use Instagram at all. You try to make it different. You find a symbol, you find a different way to word your name, you add something to the end. You get creative and end up finding something that's different, but still feels like you. So the passcode theory in content and brand strategy is being able to choose 5 topics that you can see yourself being interested in for a long time. Not all of these you have to be an expert in, by the way. The qualifier is that you'd be interested enough in these topics or subtopics to take the researcher stance, right? So you don't have to be an expert, but you're willing to learn about it. So let's say that nutrition is the main topic of authority or area of expertise that you want to showcase. The rest of the topics can be things that you are just into and curious about. There's already a lot of nutrition Instagram accounts or nutrition podcasts out there, right? But let's say you add 2 more topics into the mix. You say, okay, I'm going to talk about MMA and comedy as well. So now you've got a podcast that talks about nutrition, MMA, and comedy. Okay. Now on top of nutrition, when you add something like MMA and comedy, you now have a combination that's a little bit harder to find. But let's say, okay, you can still find some podcasts that talk about this or some people that have these 3 shared interests. But now what if you add 2 more topics? Okay, so on top of nutrition, MMA, and comedy, let's stack parenting and finance. Now that's a pretty flavorful combination. Even if you can find someone who is covering this exact combination of topics, it's very unlikely that they are going to be covering it in the exact same way. Because remember, there are subtopics within each of these topics. So nutrition has subtopics like weight loss, hormones, performance, intermittent fasting, cooking, etc. I'm going to share an example of somebody who's executing this beautifully. Joe Rogan just renewed his Spotify deal for $250 million. That's $250 million. And it was a big deal when he landed this for $100 million in the first place. And it's not about the money. It's not even if you like Joe Rogan and his content. It's about extracting what we can and learning about what he's doing with the genre here. And one of the things that I think has made his show really, really work is the combination of different topics and communities that he's able to pull from. So if you think about it, he's been a comedian the longest, even longer than an MMA commentator and the other things that he's interested in. But I remember a coworker of mine who only listened to the health and wellness episodes where like a scientist or doctor would come on. And I thought it was funny because I would never listen to those, and I would only listen to the ones where comedians were on. And then you have people who would no idea that he is a comedian because they know him for the MMA. So it's okay for somebody to tune in for one thing and for them to really tune out the rest, because you're playing a bigger game here where you're not really just a show anymore, you're the network, right? And within the network, there's, hey, we talk about comedy, we talk about UFOs, we talk about MMA, we talk about political stuff, right? So a big benefit of pulling from these vastly diverse communities, which are really just the topics that you're interested in, is that there's crossover, right? The science people come in and they enjoy some of the comedians over time. The comedians enjoy some of the science because, hey, I need to get healthy too, right? There's this weird connection that begins to happen if people are in the ecosystem long enough. And for the people where it doesn't do that, where they're just there for the comedy or they're just there for the MMA, that's fine too. The strategy obviously does take a longer time to work, but in the long run, it adds more strength and leverage to, I would say, your personal name. I find it funny that it's often the weird and quirky things that we were made fun of before, that we're afraid that we're going to be made fun of for, that end up being the things that give us personality, even when that's not why people tuned in. People are here for nutrition. But when you showcase some of the other things that you're interested in, it adds flavor. It doesn't just feel like a lecture that they could have, looked up a Harvard lecture on a nutrition class and just listened to that instead. So when you're choosing your topics for the passcode theory, just know that it doesn't have to be something that you explicitly state and tell everybody, hey, these are the 5 things we're going to be talking about. It's often an internal thing that bleeds out into everything that you make. But you can take this approach of explicitly stating a few of these things, because it works well when somebody's like, hey, what do you talk about on your podcast, right? You're like, oh, I talk about parenting, finance, and nutrition. Okay. It feels natural to kind of give somebody some variety there. So it's like, okay, sometimes stating these topics or subtopics is what paves the path into your world. So nutrition may have been kind of interesting to this person, right? But maybe it was the parenting. When you said parenting, they were like, oh, okay, this is a person who talks about nutrition, but also gets the complications of parenting life. This seems a little bit more like it is for me, right? Somebody who's considering a nutrition coach is already getting hit with nutrition stuff left and right. But maybe it's the parenting or the finance stuff that really allows somebody to connect with you, right? They go, finally, somebody gets me. And that's the effect that's very common to produce through your content when you apply the passcode theory correctly. So that effect is a very common byproduct of setting the right passcode for you. So choose your 5 topics and see if it shifts your attitude about some of the things that you want to make and create. If you're using this for any long form content like podcasts, YouTube channels, email newsletters, blogs, check out the free tools and stuff in the description below or at mizhq.com. That's mizhq.com. I think it'll save you a lot of time and headaches in the long run. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you next time.